Welcome to the Josh Bolton Show, where we dive into interesting and inspiring conversations. And now, your host, Josh Bolton.
Let's try that. There we go.
Hey, there it is.
You have to be 30% smarter than the machinery you operate, and I frequently fail that test.
Well, I didn't know that rule, so it doesn't matter.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. So where are you at, Terry?
I am located just outside of Wilmington, North Carolina, about a half hour from the coast.
All right. I love the outfit you have, by the way.
Yeah, I clean up good.
Yes, you do.
Yeah. So where is Arcadia?
Do you know where Los Angeles is?
Yes.
So it's like southeast of LA.
Northeast of San Diego.
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right. Interesting.
It's like in the middle of nowhere, even though it's suburbs. Like no one, even California, we don't really know it. So.
Well, LA, you want to talk about the suburban blur. It just sort of sprawls on forever and ever.
It does. Now let's say my parents just got back from a wedding up in Northern California past Sacramento. And my mom's like, it's so weird. There's like country people in California. I'm like, well, it is a big state. There's like three states that can fit in us. So.
Yeah. Well, there's a big difference between NoCal and SoCal and the Valley and the coast. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I used to spend a fair amount of time in Sacramento for my job, dealing with state agencies. And just the difference between the Valley and San Francisco.
Oh, it's huge.
It's two entirely different worlds. So
100%. Yeah. I noticed that here where like, if you go from one city and you cross the other one and you're just like, wow, am I in the same place or am I in trouble now?
Well, it's interesting where I am at the moment. The community my wife and I live in is a very relatively new community. I think they started building 10, 15 years ago. And it's a new development. And I'd have to say 95% of the people in this development are off of the I-95 corridor going up to Boston. So there are very few North Carolinians or Southerners in the mix at all. And here we are in North Carolina. It's, we're all Yankees.
I wouldn't go that far, but if you insist.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just, it's the demographics, the shifts that are taking place are kind of epic. So how do we go about this? I'm new to podcasting.
Oh, okay. I'm pretty easygoing. I'm just more of a conversation. Wherever it goes, and I just try to keep tabs as we're going along. Because you were saying you wanted to talk about the future of our species, given how fast societal and technological disruptions are.
Yeah, I just published a book on Amazon.
Hell
and yeah. The title is Our Fourth Age, a Village Elder's Story for Young Homines Sapientes about their future history. And the point I make in the book is that we have gone through, as a species, we've already gone through three ages, what I'll call ages.
Okay.
In the first age, from I'll say 200,000 years ago, roughly, which is when anatomically modern humans emerged.
Right.
Up until, let's say, 12,000 years ago, we were hunter-gatherers.
Yeah.
From about 12,000 years ago, 10,000 years, well, I'd say 10,000 BC, up until 1785, to pick a date, we were farmer herders primarily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Self-sustaining on your own land.
Yeah. And in 1785, the reason I picked that date is that's about the time that steam engines reliable steam engines became commercially available to drive the Industrial Revolution.
Okay.
So from about 1785 up until the beginning of COVID, which is a nice, convenient, catastrophic demarcation point, we made things. We were manufacturers.
Right.
When you look over that timeline from 200,000 years ago to today, the rate and the degree of change has gradually increased.
Right.
Such that starting with the Industrial Revolution and now increasingly, it's gone from, going back and forth like this to all of a sudden it's going like that. And I would argue that we are confronting the fourth age, which we are about to embark on, which is driven largely by societal and technological disruptions that are all happening at the same time. So, for example, on the societal side, for the first time in the history of our species, more of us live in cities than in the country.
Mm-hmm.
For the first time, half of the countries in the world have birth rates below replacement level.
Right. Yeah, it's not enough kids to even out everything.
So Eastern Europe, Japan, Korea are all losing about 40% of their population over time.
Mm-hmm.
They're dramatically shrinking. 95% of the population growth that the UN estimates up until the end of the century is Africa. It's all Africa. So you're seeing countries in Africa growing by 500%. So in some countries, they're collapsing and growing older. In Africa, they're exploding. China and India, in particular, both countries, for different reasons, have a disparity between males and females, the birth rate.
Wasn't China at one point they had a rule?
One child policy, which they did away with, but it was too late.
Yeah, too much damage was done.
Yeah. And so there are now 10 million, 20 million Chinese men for which there are no Chinese women.
Right.
And it's even worse in India. I want to say it's close to 50 million men for which there are no Indian women. So that's a lot of unrequited testosterone.
Yes.
That's also destabilizing. So you've got a lot. And then, of course, we're getting older. China's already getting older, and China is already past peak population. There are a lot of demographic experts, though, that are saying that the UN numbers are wrong, and that because of urbanization, once people get to cities, they stop having children. When you're in the country, you need kids to work the land.
I would say get the cattle in. You get one for the cattle, like two for the field.
Yeah.
Another one just to do the back kind of thing.
When you get into the city, they're just an additional mouth to feed.
Yeah, they're an expense. They're not an asset at that
point.
And
as women have access to better health care and greater education, that also decides against more children. So there are a lot of demographic experts that are saying that the world isn't going to continue to grow to the end of the century. The world's population is going to peak maybe within 20, 30 years. Okay. And then it starts going down. And it won't stop.
Mostly, but all things, there is ebb and flows. Eventually, it will have to hit a resistance, like a bottom.
Very, very, very likely. But that's sort of the next iteration beyond. The challenge is when you look at most of the policymakers. There's a gentleman, Hans Rosling, who passed away a couple of years ago, but Swedish. I want to say he was a surgeon, but he did an awful lot of work with statistics, public speaker. And what he discovered was that most people don't really know the facts about the condition of the world.
Right.
So he put together I want to say it was a 13 question quiz.
Okay.
And it was multiple choice. And he tested the attendees at Davos and discovered to his chagrin that most of them didn't really know the facts of the world when it came to poverty, education, death rates, just basic statistical information. They didn't have it right. He then tested 12,000 people over 17 countries.
Okay.
And most of them got it wrong too. In fact, no one got them all right. And I want to say 15% got them all wrong. The point is, when you're trying to plan and strategize for the future and cope with the future, if you don't have the facts straight, you're going to make the wrong plans. Now, given that the rate of change is accelerating, and we haven't talked about the technology stuff.
That's a whole hot mess right there.
That's between 3D printing, the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, brand new materials, synthetic biology, cheap, ubiquitous, reliable off-grid energy, and that's just a couple. They're all coming together at the same time. And I would argue that what we are about to witness is the obsolescence of the classic Henry Ford 20th century mass production model. And it's not my quote. I'm repeating someone else's words, but we are going from a past of a few making millions to a future of millions making a few.
Yes. So that's so funny. I just want to interject there real quick. That's one of the things I've been telling people. My whole schmick is we're not the Ford or the whatever, where it's you don't want the people to have an opinion because they're literally there to bolt something and move it down kind of thing. But now we have automation. We don't need humans to do that anymore. We just maybe need one that has good critical thinking that could be like, oh, this machine's down, call so-and-so to repair it kind of thing. So I'm like, it's a bit of a renaissance where the people don't have to be oppressed in this and that, but it's also an age of creativity and critical thinking when before that wasn't.
Well, there's a interesting science fiction book written in 1999 by Neil Stephenson called The Diamond Age.
Okay.
And in The Diamond Age, Stephenson describes a future largely driven by nanotechnology and artificial intelligence. And in this future, which very may well be this fourth age that I'm talking about, the need for people to work to survive, where heretofore, all through the other ages, you spent your waking hours putting food on the table and clothes on your back and shelter over your head.
Right.
In Stevenson's future, technology is such that people don't really have to work in order to survive. They are provided housing, they're provided food and clothing, and all their physical wants, sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The baselines are all taken care of. They just don't have a job. And then the question is, as a human being, what do you do when you don't have to work? How much bad poetry can you write? I mean,
right.
And that could be the dystopia future we're looking at.
Well, I already think we have the seeds planted, especially with the coronavirus lockdowns. Like, I worked through it, but I just didn't even realize there was an option. If I I'm scared of corona, I can get 600 a week kind of thing. And it was just one of those. I was chatting with someone at my work. It was just like, this is going to be interesting. The kids coming of age that turned 18, that were about to go to get a job, and the government's like, no, just stay home. We'll pay you $600 a week, play your Fortnite. And the kids now coming to work were like, it was hysterical. One of them just literally walked off, stole on the clock, and we're like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Well, aren't you gonna pay me to play video games?" And we're like, "No,
Yeah.
we're paying you to go sweep the floor." Oh no! And it just literally walked away and never came back.
Yeah.
I'm like, so this is going to be interesting to see.
Well, and when you take all of that disruptive change, the societal and the technological, I would argue that over the history of the species, we created cultures, civilizations and cultures, and then
Right.
societies to create norms of behavior to enable us to cope with change and chaos. When you go back to the original 200,000 years ago in the savannah of Africa, we were imbued with a series of instincts that are hardwired into us.
Right.
And I'll summarize them as we are afraid of everything.
Well, I mean, for good reason. Back then, if a leaf moved, there was a high chance there was a lion there.
Exactly so. Exactly so. So we tend to be afraid of everything. And when we feel threatened, we tend to overreact violently.
Yes.
We form groups, we join groups because we've discovered that being in a group improves our chance of survival, finding a mate, and passing on our genes. And that's what it's all about, is passing on your genes. So we join groups. We try to achieve greater status within our group. We'll climb the hierarchy within that group because that improves your chances to survive, getting a better mate. Overall, you're up the pyramid. And the final instinctive attribute is curiosity. But it's not curiosity in that, oh, it's wonderful and we're looking at the stars, and it's more a case of, I'm curious about what's over that hill because I want to understand it before it kills me.
Right.
So it's a defense mechanism. So we have those four sort of core instincts underlying everything else that we do. Now, when this rate of change starts accelerating, we have all of a sudden discovered that our societal mores, our cultural mores that were built over thousands of years to deal with change are becoming obsolete. I'll call this time depth.
Okay.
Time depth is think of it this way. Go back 100 years, 200 years, 5,000 years. Any child from 200,000 years ago up until today could look at their parents and their grandparents and say that their lives are going to give me a template of what my future is going to look like. There may be some change, but if they were farmers, I'm going to be a farmer. You could look at the past and you could look at your family and you could say that that's likely what my future is going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
That's no longer the case. There isn't anything I can tell my grandchildren about how I was raised or where I lived or my black and white TV or my rotary telephone with everybody else listening to the line.
Yeah.
There's nothing about my experiences that are going to apply to that future that they're encountering with societal and technological disruption, reinventing everything that they're going to cope with.
Okay, I want to say something there because there's some things that even my grandfather taught me that he even said the same thing. He's like, my technology and my stuff was way different than now, but he taught me a lot of the core. Like you give 100%, like that is like a fail if you only give 100%. You go 250 if you can. You knuckle down, you suck it up, and you just keep going. That's not really taught anymore. So there are some things from the history that are still valuable.
Oh, I'm not saying that they're not valuable, but they're out of context.
Right.
And I'll give you an example that you might find interesting. When you think about contemporary perceived human traits that are considered problematic.
Okay.
Dyslexia, ADHD, autism. Research indicates that 200,000 years ago, those were not problems. Those were advantages.
Mm-hmm.
Having people with those attributes in your group improved the survivability of the group.
So, you touched on something I've been thinking about for a long time. I've been having a lot of chats with people about the American school system, how it's broken. And my whole story of I was drugged out because I was the odd one that didn't follow rules. And as I've introspected and did all my reading and realized, oh, wait, they're the weird ones. I'm the normal one kind of thing. Yeah. And it's like, why would they force me to conform to them? Hence the group talk. But there are things like for me, I do martial arts. So for my martial arts instructor, I tell him, I don't like chaos consistently, but if you put me in short spurts of chaos, I can get things done. But that's just my advantage of ADHD.
Yes. Dyslexia wasn't an issue
because there was no letters
before the written word.
Right.
Dyslexic people learn visually. They don't learn. If you'd taken them back before the written word, they were fine. They were perfectly fine.
No one noticed the difference.
They were very strong contributors to any group. And that's just an example of sort of the templates that we have. We perceive problems. Take it into a future that doesn't look like any of the past. And some of these templates don't fit anymore.
They don't.
Societal expectations in terms of group behavior and activities and what have you, they're not going to fit that future. And so the challenge is really for the millennial generation, the Gen Z generation, to and it's easier said than done, because as a boomer, I mean, my generation kind of screwed it up. But rethinking a future that doesn't look like the past at all. And again, going from we look at, let's say, climate change. I think part of the problem with the issue of climate change is the perception is that we will continue into the future with the economic model that we have today, and that it will simply continue on as is.
No, that's impossible.
That economic model isn't going to change. And so the implications for environmental issues, climate change or what have you, are fundamentally different, but people aren't thinking about it in those terms. No. And once you get to the point that your populations start declining and you have fewer young people to pay for taking care of more old people, the societal disruptions that are coming at us are something that basically your generation is going to have to figure out. So, I mean, that's in a nutshell what the book is about, is trying to identify those issues, and basically trying to start a couple good arguments.
I would say there's so many good arguments within all that you just said. I have one question. The way you're talking, have you read the book The Fourth Turning?
No.
It's very similar to what you're saying, but more specific on lineage of what happens. It's one I would highly recommend.
The Fourth Turning. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Well, I'll tell you, in writing it, it was 40, 50 years worth of contemplating and then trying to put it down on paper, which is ironic because I didn't put it down on paper. It was electrons. But in the process of writing it, I really discovered how ignorant I was, because every time I got to a point where I thought I understood what I was talking about, I discovered another line of research or another resource that introduced me to topics that I hadn't even thought about, and trying to synthesize it all is a challenge. A good example is, I mean, some of the technologies that we're looking at have the potential when you think of synthetic biology, when you think of CRISPR and sort of genetic modifications and what have you, of being potentially catastrophic.
Oh yeah.
If they're not controlled. And the image that comes to mind for me is Kurt Vonnegut. You're familiar with Kurt Vonnegut? He was an author in the 60s and the 70s, unfortunately committed suicide.
What were some of his titles?
Cat's Cradle.
Okay,
God bless you, God bless you, Mr. Rosewater. Cat's Cradle was the one that, in Cat's Cradle, the plot involves a scientist who develops a new form of water called Ice 9. And Ice 9 freezes at 110 degrees.
Okay. And
the reason he made it was ostensibly for the U.S. Marines, because they had to march through mud, and this would freeze the mud, and we didn't have to march through it anymore. But at the end of the story, it's a long, convoluted story with lots of individuals doing lots of different things. But at the end of the story, a crystal of this Ice 9 is inadvertently dropped into the ocean, which instantaneously freezes all of the water in the planet. And any person who would touch it would immediately be frozen as well. So it was basically the end of everything. And there are so many disruptive technologies where the Ice 9 potential for the technology is there, unless we think about it. And it's nuclear weapons writ large, but genetic modification, gray goo is sort of the quintessential example of you develop nanotech that runs amok. So the technologies that we are introducing, and they're all coming online at the same time.
I want to say, especially with the artificial intelligence, some of the higher performing computers that us normal civilians will never be able to have, at least cheaply, like the super quant computers, where I've read articles where like they've already ran trillions of simulations on how to save the earth, and only 10 work, and only 2 are economically viable. And I just sat there and I'm like, okay, I mean, not bad, but it's just like I guess the way it approached it, it completely removed human morale and emotions from the equations.
Well, and also, the part of the challenge with AI is
the data,
it's not the calculation, it's the inputs and the assumptions that launch the calculation. So, if you're building, for example, the model you just described, that's built upon an economic model that still perceives mass production of a few companies making millions of units.
Mm-hmm.
If that's sort of the economic model, you're going to get a very different result than if you're living in a world of local production of custom products, onesies and twosies. And that will be enabled by 3D printing. Just the whole economic model is about to be blown up and redone.
If it isn't already.
It's in the process, and people just don't see it happening.
Right. I just find it funny how you say 3D printing, because I have a little mini 4-inch one right here.
Yeah. I had a class at Baldwin Wallace University over 10 years ago, where we looked at 3D printing at the time, did scenario planning. I'm a strategic planner, so I do a lot of scenario planning, and did scenario planning about what the future of 3D printing might be. And then for the company I was working for at the time, the class presented what the options were in terms of what that might mean for the company. It took the company 10 years to finally get engaged on React to 3D printing. And that's part of the problem, is that nobody plans.
It's all fire putting out, which is the biggest problem that you could do, kind of thing. You're not addressing the problem. You're making it worse by not seeing it.
Well, there's a a model called the DIKW model of analytics, data to information to knowledge to wisdom.
Okay.
And you start off with a fire hose of data, and you sort it out to useful bits, which is the information. And then you take the information and you find interrelationships among the data points. So you develop knowledge, the capacity as to how to do something. But wisdom is the decision as to what to do, not how to do, or what not to do. And my experience in business has been that most managers run off of knowledge, not wisdom. That is, they're expert at doing something. They know how to do it, so they continue to do it, whether it remains the right thing to be done.
Right.
So, I'm continuing to rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic because I'm really good at rearranging deck chairs, as opposed to be looking past that as to what I should really be doing, which is fighting a lifeboat.
Yes. No, I'm going to say the way you're explaining it is kind of what I've been thinking is smart guys like you can say, this is exactly what you need to do. But if the manager doesn't have the proper input or the data, they're going to be like, no, because that doesn't make sense. I've been told to do this and only this. So
right.
It's one of those smart guys like you. They could pay you all that money.
And again, the purpose of the book is to get people to think about different courses of action and then evaluating among them. It's easy to come up with the analysis as how to do something and do it well. The critical question is whether to do it as opposed to doing something else. This is sort of the classic issue for military commanders. Frontal assault, flank assault, retreat. I have different options. I'm very expert at doing each of them. The question is, which is the right thing to do? And that requires judgment and wisdom. It's funny when you hear the word wise, it invariably is associated with older people, not younger people. And I think the reason that is so is because wisdom is the result of surviving multiple failures. If I've lived long enough to survive all of my failures, I have almost de facto become wise because I learned something every time I failed. And it just happens to be that young people haven't had the time to fail enough to acquire the wisdom that people who are older and have survived have amassed.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Like I'm 28. I've read a lot of books and I'm more wiser than most my age. But even I realized like I've not actually gone into trenches. So I don't know. It could be book smart, but if you go into street smart, it's like doesn't even work.
Big difference.
Yeah. That's the one thing. As like I've gone through my journey with talking to people and reading books, I realized, the one thing you can actually hold on to is you don't know what you don't know.
Yes.
Essentially.
Well, it's funny when you going back to instincts and the universality of them across all cultures. There are also personality traits which are universal, and there are different personality indicator tools. Myers-Briggs is the one that I speak of.
Okay.
Simply because it's been validated universally across different cultures. And Myers-Briggs identifies 16 different personality types,
right?
Which leads me to infer that because it's a universal and exists in all human populations, those personality types, having a variety of them, was a survival value back 200,000 years ago.
Right.
Or those personality types wouldn't have evolved. Well, I was always frustrated with that, and I took it a step further because there's really no way of evaluating the effectiveness of different personalities. And so I came up with my own sort of character analysis where I think you can judge people on 4 attributes, which is, are they smart or I'm going to get smart or stupid. And it's an attribute of your inherent thinking capacity. Then there's educated and ignorant.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's simply a factor of how much information you've digested.
Right.
So I can be stupid and educated, and I can be smart and ignorant. And the thing is, ignorance is curable, but stupidity is forever. And then there is, am I ambitious or lazy? And then the 4th attribute is basically whether I'm wealthy or poor. And that's a societal attribute, more based upon your societal group, your family.
Right.
Born into a poor family, born into a wealthy family, you have opportunities for education that are going to vary. So it's not an inherent trait, but it impacts your character.
Right.
What scares me are stupid, educated, ambitious, wealthy people. Okay, because they think, to your point, they think they know because they've gone to school and they've got a lot of facts, but they don't have the brains to use them correctly. And they're ambitious, and they have the wherewithal to get to where they want to be.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm afraid a lot of our politicians maybe fall into this category. And when they have power, they're very dangerous.
Yes, especially when they're in numbers.
Yes.
Yeah, that's one thing. The stupid, ignorant. Again, it's one of those, I've always thought about it, but I never had like someone with a similar thought pattern for it. So for the Myers-Briggs part, I'll get to that. I've taken the test like many times, but I realize it's my personality type. I hit the INTP.
Okay.
Guess I'm really good at, like, kind of like you, good at strategy, good at overseeing, but you tell me to do the details, and it's like, what details? Don't you see the forest kind of thing?
Yeah. I'm an ENTJ.
Yeah, pretty much the same thing, except you're more judgment than perception.
Yeah, I'm very judgmental, and give me a task and just get out of the way.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But for me, I realized when I was doing that, it comes back to the ignorant and smart. I realized I'm still the same personality type, unless I'm gonna like brainwash myself to change, but that might not be smart. Is I realized, yes, I like consuming, but my problem is analysis paralysis. Compared to the ignorant person, it's like, well, there's a slim chance of winning, so let's do it, kind of thing.
Yes. It's actually that speaks to the bullshit principle.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, a Princeton professor wrote about it. There really is a sort of a definition of bullshit, which is a bullshitter is not intentionally lying to you. Their purpose is simply to throw enough information or opinions at you as to confuse your thinking and change it. So it's not an overt lie that they're giving you. They're just giving you a whole bunch of stuff that's confusing the issue.
Right.
And Brandolini's law about bullshit is it takes 4 times as much effort to defeat bullshit as it does to deliver it.
Something like that.
Yeah, it is so easy to spew it out, and it's so hard to
Clean it up.
clean it up. So
Yeah. Um, that's one of those I I'm gonna say it this way. I'm not that. I used to be the guy that bullshit. I just said a lot of smart things and people were like, oh my God. And then yeah, when it blew up in my face, it blew up hard. And that was one of those. It was hard to recover from. Now I just like I'm brutally honest. It's like if you don't like it, well, that is what I know at this moment, at this time. If it changes, I'll change too.
right, right.
Um, so I'm curious. We touched on politics and AI. I've heard rumors of at one point, at least Congress was thinking of using AI to essentially censor everyone from saying profane, derogatory words like the N word, like whore, all that, etc., and would actually scan all our conversations. But the problem was that I kept hearing is, what about freedom of speech? Yes, it's profane and evil and bad, but it's like, if someone really wants to say it, they can say it. That is what our country says. And now you're saying they can't say that. So, but I'm hearing they're still wanting to figure out something with AI to modify messages. And I feel, kind of touching on AI, it's only as good as the database. Well, for lack of a better word, if everyone's democratic and very liberal and believes no one should say anything bad, and yet then there's the extreme opposite, what happens to the people in the middle who they're the ones that are going to get taken out essentially between this with this war of politics. And that was essentially the moral of the argument for that article, was like, how far is too far kind of thing.
Well, the challenge for me has always been who decides
Right.
what's appropriate speech and what's not, and why does that entity or group, and this is groupthink, that's classic groupthink. Why does that group's definition of acceptable trump another group's definition of acceptable?
Yeah, I don't understand.
There was an old phrase. I don't know, as it was on New Hampshire license plates. Maybe it was live free or die. I don't know. But the old phrase was, I disagree completely with what you're saying, but I'll fight to the death to defend your right to say it.
Something like that. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
And I think we've lost sight of that. That the open forum of ideas and the combat among them is essential to progress. And if you close that off and decide that there's only right thinking and every other thinking is wrong thinking, this is classic 1984.
Yeah.
I mean, this, and that becomes scary.
It does. And then kind of like I was mentioning with AI, because man, Orwell called it way back then, and even the concepts weren't even there. He said, what was it? Your balls are listening to you, something else is listening to you, and your TV is listening to you. And I sat there and I'm like, wait, walls could be your Alexa thermostat, TV could be a smart TV, and whatever the on person thing was the phone. And I'm like, he called this stuff back in when this wasn't even a thing.
Right.
And that's the big one. That when I read through, I was listening to it on YouTube for free. I still need to finish it. And that's when I sat there and I'm like, the extreme, oh, you only worship Big Brother. Well, yes, that's an allegory or a symbolic representation of whatever, but that would be essentially be where we're at. You only bow to Congress. You don't even bow to the president, and you do what they say. And if you do, we'll give you an extra whatever kind of thing.
Well, and it very well may be that it's not even the political hierarchies It may be the fourth estate. It may be the media hierarchies,
I think it's more the media than anything else.
and as to what's acceptable to be published, what's unacceptable to be published, and the pre-digesting of information, so that you're being fed somebody's perceived knowledge, but you're not getting the data or the information to make your own assessment. That's, for me, that's the ultimate danger.
Well, it is. We're seeing it with the media, especially. Actually, one of my first few guests, we were supposed to talk about something, but we got talking about, because it was earlier in like February of 2021, earlier this year. Sorry, I already think we're on 23. And the thing we were saying is like the media is just, it's almost like intentionally gross and sickening, because then it lingers in your head. But all they're doing is emotionally winding us up to watching our ad, but they're not actually giving us the data or the things we actually need, where it's like, oh yeah, this whole 10% more effective, that's in whatever situation. But yeah, then it's more effective. Otherwise, same old, same old. And we were just saying, a lot of our societal problems is by media. It doesn't matter, unless in general, I was assuming pretty much the whole world, because, and even a New Zealand guy and an Australian is like, yeah, media is the biggest problem. It's like how the Australian told me, he's like, it's almost like there's maybe like 5 people in a room that represent the 5 different regions of the world. And they're all like, we don't like this, so we're going to make it go away now.
Well, and this goes back to Rosling's survey of the, if you will, our perfumed elite at Davos, and discovering that while they were very happy with themselves, they actually didn't know the facts of the world.
Right.
And so their judgments as to what was appropriate or inappropriate behavior were based upon faulty data, and each hierarchy. You join a group, and you want to climb up that hierarchy. It could be a business. This happens in business. Each business is its own microcosm of hierarchies. And the group think, you're either with us or you're against us. And yes. It's frightening to see how certain people are pilloried when they were in a group, and then they decided that they were going to speak out against the group. And then all of a sudden, the elites in the group attack. They won't tolerate, and it's becoming, again, if I'm not certain, if I'm perceiving uncertainty, which leads to chaos, that's frightening. And I don't like to be frightened. I don't like to be frightened. So I'm gonna make sure that everybody agrees with this message, because everybody then will be calm, and we don't have to worry about anything. But that's not the way things are going to work.
I mean, that can fix the short-term problem, that's for sure, but it can't fix the long-term. Eventually, like a quick patch, that's fine. Like eventually you just be like, okay, by the way, we had to do this instead. That's the one thing I've realized with talking to all these business and high-level executives is communication. But it seems once it hit about like the manager, then like his supervisor, it hits the first supervisor and district manager, the C-suite don't know what the hell's going on. They've fudged the data so hard that when they list it, it's like, oh, hey, everything's going great kind of thing. And that was the one thing.
Well, yeah. And the other version of that is when you've got a CEO who has decided that he or she knows what the future is.
Yes.
And don't confuse me with the facts. So you coming up the pyramid, from the regions to the business groups to the C-suite, with material or information that doesn't jive with the CEO thinks, it just gets discounted.
Mhm. No, I've seen it multiple times working just jobs in general, where the manager, the hierarchy of the site wouldn't listen. Good example. I was working at a security gig, and I told the supervisor, like the head manager of the place, I'm like, hey, like there seems to be a leak in the back, kind of thing, because I had to walk. He's like, oh, it's nothing. 3 days later, the whole thing ruptured, and it became messy. And essentially, I just wiped my hands clean. And I told the client, I was like, I informed the supervisor, the manager on the site, and he just took me as an ignorant child, and here we are.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where it's one of those, I have yet to figure it out. It's like, how do you get through someone that is so stubborn, hard-headed, because so many things could change for good. And we don't have to worry about the dystopia. But I can't seem, there's no one clear answer. How do you get through that? Do you have an insight on that?
Well, I mean, we all operate off of instincts. And when you're in a particular position, I'll give you a great example.
Okay.
Years ago, I was taking a leadership course in a corporation. Excuse me. And they sent, I'd say there were about 30 of us, mid-level managers.
Okay.
For a week course at the University of Indiana on leadership business stuff. Okay. And one of the games that the faculty played with us to sort of drive home the message was a game of freeze tag. So they took us out in the field. There was a big circle, and they broke us into 3 teams. And one team was wizards, and the other was trolls, and the other was dwarves. I don't know, whatever. And we're all standing in the circle, and the supervisor yells out, "Wizards!" So wizards are now it, and you're trying to tag other people before they get outside the circle. Okay. Well, I should back up a step. When they first put us in the circle, said we're going to play freeze tag. The object of this game is to get everyone on the same side. Okay.
Interesting. Okay.
Okay. Then they go wizards, and the wizards are tagging people, and everybody runs out. And then everybody goes back in the circle, and they say dwarves, and does the same thing. And it was somebody else. It wasn't me. I didn't figure it out. I think one of the female managers said, "Wait a minute. The object is not to get everybody on your side. The object is to get everybody on the same side. So the next time the guy yells out trolls or whatever, everybody else stands still to get tagged, and then we will all be on the same side."
Oh, no. Okay. I see that problem now.
You see? And so everybody goes, okay. So yells trolls, and we all stood still, and everybody got tagged except for one manager who ran out of the circle. We were now all on the same side. We had mistaken. We didn't hear. We were so hardwired to compete that our default assumption was, I need to be everybody on my side, not the same side. And there was this one manager. He was an operations manager from one of the factories. And we had to basically wrestle him to the ground the next time around, to finally tag him. But it's a classic case of we instinctively react in a certain way. We're not thinking it through. There's 2 parts to your brain. There's the primitive brain and there's the modern brain. Okay. Without getting into all of the gory details, the current best thinking, it used to be, the modern brain is here to control your primitive brain and keep you from doing all of these primitive things. The current best thinking is that the purpose of the modern brain is to come up with a persuasive explanation to your group about why you're going to do what your primitive brain is telling you to do. And when you think about it, that really plays out. If we all applied modern analytical thought to everything that we do, and we were all looking at the same set of facts, we would all analyze it in generally the same way and come up with sort of a universal decision or conclusion.
Right.
But we never do that. You have different groups that are looking at the exact same situation and come up with diametrically opposing positions, which often leads to aggression and war.
Yes.
And it's because it's driven by a set of instinctive drivers, not intellectual, analytical drivers. And so when you get back to your, my operations manager, who he could not accept the fact that it couldn't be everybody on his group. He had to be everybody on his group, even though that's not what the objective was. That's what you see in business hierarchies all the time. I have to win. I can't do what the analysis suggests or what's best for the group. I have to win.
Yeah. If I have to win at all costs, essentially is the mindset, which is extremely, extremely dangerous.
And that's exactly why when you think about the set of instincts that drive us and the chaotic future we're looking at, do we have the innate capacity to overcome those instinctive drivers and survive that chaos?
No. There was one person I was talking to, and that was the biggest thing. It was kind of like yours, like the 200,000 years ago. We kind of looked like we do, maybe missing a couple limb, like bones here and there or veins, but he's like, we're pretty much the same. And he said, like your analogy, like 15,000 years ago. Yeah. 15000. We introduced farming, which he said, like you, hunter-gatherers, but there was still like the community. One guy usually just had a lot of land, everyone tended to it. Then if the neighbors wanted extra cabbage, go for it, kind of thing. But in general, he's like, that's why they were still healthy, they were still lean, because there were periods of no food at all. So they had to learn to preserve and hold everything. And that's where I said, okay, well, what you getting at? He's like, well, recently, within 200 years, in the span of everything, we've introduced mass-produced food, which has chemicals, which we've never eaten before. And especially for me, especially I didn't know, like, oh yeah, soy product. It's who's calling me? We're now playing the game of chemicals, but hormones, because like soy in small doses is not a problem, kind of thing. But in the large consumption, like Impossible Burgers, whatever, it's very estrogenic for both man and female. That is very dangerous, because for a female, that encourages breast cancer. For men, it just encourages to become more like women. And it was just one of those, I think there was a DNA altering aspect to that. That one I'm not sure, but that's what he brought up. He's like, yeah, we still don't know the consequences of all this food we're introducing, and yet we're saying it's the name of saving the world. He's like, but we're not. He's like, it's just.
A great example along those lines is the obesity epidemic, global obesity epidemic. When you go back to the ice ages, and archaeologists have discovered these, what they call Venus figures. They're small totems. They're little carvings of a female figure that is quite obese. Well, what were these for? The current best thinking is when you looked at when these were carved and you put them on a timeline, when the ice age was at its worst, you got more of these figures and warmer periods when you got less of these figures. So they were in some way a totem that was considered important at the time of starvation, when you did not have food. And obviously, fat, healthy, plump women are going to survive better and have babies than starving women in a time of need.
Mm-hmm.
And so these totems were considered a good luck charm, that hopefully I'll get enough calories during this ice age to survive and bear children. Okay. Well, our bodies were designed, when there was extra calories to be had, that we would store them up, because to your point, you didn't always have calories available. So having that extra fat was a critical survival tool.
Right.
Fast forward to the third age, which we're in, just leaving. Well, over the past 50 years, again, when you look at the data, the availability of food on a global basis has dramatically increased. And certainly in the developed world, our access to sugar
It's insane.
Is insane. And so that instinctive biological survival mechanism of storing fat, which was appropriate in an earlier age, is now going to kill us, because now we have all the food we could possibly want, and we don't stop eating.
No, that's actually been my new thing, because I'm getting it under control now, blood pressure problems. And it was just one of those, I sat there and I'm like, well, what's the main cause? As I'm saying that, I'm eating some toast with butter, and I'm like, I just looked at the toast. Would I find this on the African plains? Probably not. It's like pizza. You probably wouldn't find that there. So I looked at then my fridge. I'm like, bell peppers. I'm like, yeah, I mean, yeah, like that would be our farmers. And I'm like, look at the meat. I'm like, again, you'd find meat in the plains because you have to kill it, but you have to skin it, prep it. That could take a day right there. You still don't have calories. And then you have to cook it. That could be another half a day. So you're looking at 2 days without food. And I got a weird kick. I was watching like African tribal people, the last hunter gatherers, and they said it, and it was just one of those. It clicked. One of them said, "We can actually go without food for 3 days. And as long as we have access to water, we're happy. Yeah, it hurts that we don't have food, but." And that's when I sat there, and I'm like, when it clicked, I'm like, yeah, like my analogy. You might find an elk. It'll take you all day to kill it. Take you half a day to drag it back, then another half a day to prep it. And it's one of those, I'm like, yeah, you're looking at almost 2 days without food. Yeah, if we go 2 hours without food, everyone's like, oh, you're going to starve.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, whether we're biologically, instinctively, cultural, are we equipped to cope with accelerating change, where anything that comes in the future looks like nothing that came in the past?
I mean, I'm gonna say, if the clip of climate change is going there, Death Valley might be the normal for the West Coast kind of thing.
I'm not all that concerned about climate change, and the reason being is the sort of the default assumption is the economic model that has driven us for the past 200 years is going to continue into the future on steroids. And that was the source of our climate change issues. Well, when you look at modern science, modern technology, first of all, that economic model is going to change. And secondly, our capacity to identify new solutions to technological problems. One of the biggest, it's the classic case of how much climate change is worth how much toxicity. That's one of the constant trade-offs.
Really?
If we were truly concerned about climate change, we'd probably be promoting nuclear energy.
Literally, it was one of those. I was listening to a hedge fund guy, and he's like, "Yeah, we have thorium now. It's not radioactive. Yeah, it does the same thing. He's like, so why aren't we doing nuclear? And that's where one of the guys was
and again, the perception, the information, the knowledge is wrong. We're not talking about 50s era nuclear energy. We're talking about
super clean, super safe,
super clean, super small.
Yeah.
Micro reactors.
It's like a 6x6 box in your backyard, and you could feed the whole neighborhood with just that one box.
Yeah. And so I have if the technology for other reasons doesn't kill us, I think the technology that we have the capacity to invent that's coming online is going to solve problems. One of the examples I use in the book is when you look at the major cities at the end of the 19th century, New York, Paris, and London.
Okay.
They were all in the 1890s. They had a conference to deal with a problem that was literally choking all three cities. It was a massive issue, and it was horse manure. The number of horses needed in these rapidly expanding cities, tens of thousands of horses, all generating hundreds of thousands of pounds of horse manure every day, and horse urine, and then all the flies and all the dust and all the disease. And they had a conference, and it was going to last all week, but it only lasted 3 days because they couldn't see an answer to how to deal with the manure that was literally drowning their cities. Now, the technological solution that nobody realized would solve it was the automobile.
But that was the blessing and the curse, though.
Well, sure. But, it goes, at the time, it was a blessing. There's two pictures of, I think it's Park Avenue, 1900, 1913. In the one picture, it's all horses and two vehicles.
Okay.
In the other one, it's all vehicles and two horses. Now, obviously, there's no perfect technology, to your point. Right. But we're now going through that next technological inflection point for transportation right now. Because we saw a crisis and we're solving it with technology. So in that respect, I'm hopeful. I don't see climate change as the end of the world. I'm more afraid of human beings being the end of the world, just because we become fearful and then we overreact violently.
Well, how I see it this way, and it sounds really crude, but it's like the Earth's been around for how many billions of years? We're only like 1 million years on this, which is like nothing for the Earth. If even half our population's wiped out, like because of climate change and no one can keep up with it, or worse comes to worse, we all die because we managed to somehow kill the bees, kind of thing. I was like, the Earth still's got like another 2-3 billion years left in it. It'll figure it out. It'll be peaceful. It can finally be stable. The atmosphere can kind of come back to normal. Plants will grow again. I'm like, the Earth itself is not going to die. We're selfish. We just don't want to die.
Well, and again, bear in mind, the global population is not going to continue to grow.
So that might be actually beneficial.
If the population is going to peak in the next 20 to 30 years and then starts to decline, that raises like horses to cars. That's a fundamentally different world with a fundamentally different set of issues and problems. And what concerns me is we're not thinking about those problems. We're thinking about problems we're actually not going to have. We're thinking about problems associated with an ever-growing world when that's not going to be the future.
Right.
So we're it's the old drunk looking for your keys under the streetlight, not because you lost them there, but because the light's better.
I haven't heard it that way before. That's kind of good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's all perspective and all communication. It's what it sounds like. But like I was mentioning earlier, how do you communicate when no one wants to listen?
Well, that's what I'm trying to do with the book.
Perfect. And a
So
lot of people are going to love it. I would say, how long do I got you for? Because I feel like you and me could just chat for like 3 hours straight.
I'm good to go.
All right. Hey, let's keep going. I do. So I could tell both of us were avoiding it. What is your take as the species, but also society, with all the political movements? What do you think is going to come of this?
Well, the, again, let me back up and say that I am a strategic I've spent most of my career doing strategy work of one sort or another. And my observation on humanity is that we all tend to think that the moment we're living in is the most profound moment there has ever been. And that the problems that we have at this moment are the worst problems that has ever occurred.
Right.
And so that tends to give us a sense of importance because we are living at the most important time, as opposed to we're just living at any old time. So everybody's got that subconscious sense that it can't get any worse. This is catastrophic. And well, with all due respect, the 60s weren't a particularly great time either. Okay. Riots, burning down cities, political riots in the Democratic Convention in Chicago, political candidates being assassinated. The 60s were pretty rough. Vietnam.
Oh, yeah.
So that as a starting point. Now, as a strategic planner, I tend to look at issues with a minimum of a 10-year window.
Okay.
And on the issues that I've been speaking of, it's even longer. It's a generational perspective. I should back up and say, when you do strategy work, there are three types of intel, that need to get cooked into a strategy.
Right.
There is what I will call tactical intelligence. Sometimes they'll call it competitive intelligence. But it's looking at the here and the now, what the other characters and players are doing, and the time frames are months to a year or two.
Right.
Then there's what I'll call market intelligence, which is what's going on within the industry as a whole. So for transportation, think vehicle electrification, think autonomous vehicles. Those are trends that are industry-wide, moving the entire industry. Those trends are maybe 5 to 10 year cycle, inception to commercialization. And then the third tier is what I'll call strategic intelligence. And this is the larger environment in which an industry operates. So think of demographics.
Okay.
As a classic, if I know how many 10-year-olds today exist, I can tell you the maximum number of 20-year-olds in 10 years. I mean, that's the kind of thing that demographics will give you. And demographics is generational. You're thinking 20, 50 years timeframe. So I tend to look at these issues with a minimum of 10 years, usually like a 50-year cycle.
Okay.
When you do that, the chatter of the day-to-day stuff goes away.
Yeah.
And you see trend lines over time. And I think the trend lines are what are critical. The chatter is the flavor of the month.
Pretty much.
And so for me, the politics of the moment, a good example is Brexit in Europe.
Right.
Donald Trump here in the States, Trump was not the cause. Trump was the consequence. Pardon me. Trump was the consequence of a dislocation that has taken place.
Mhm.
And it started with the Second World War. After the Second World War, I would argue that Western democracies, certainly the United States, evolved to the point where the complexity of governance became such that the average voter couldn't take it all in. Okay, this was not a series of landed gentry farmers who could sit around and espouse political theory. The average voter was just couldn't take it all. There was just too much going on.
Right.
And so the average voter made a compact with the politician. And the voter said, I will give you my vote if you do 4 things for me. I want my family to be safe. I want to have a job so that I can feed them.
Right.
I want my children to have a future. And I want you, as long as I'm not hurting anybody else, to leave me alone.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, those 4 things. And I don't care about all this other stuff. You figure it out, take care of it. As long as you give me those 4 things, I'll vote for you. What happened after the Second World War is our political elites decided that because all of this stuff was so complex, we needed technical experts, and technical experts would take care of our problems for us. So you see at the going through the New Deal, Second World War, and then post-Second World War, the dramatic increase in the regulatory element of governments. So we now have these departments with huge regulatory groups. And when you look at the United States Code and how big the laws are versus the Code of Federal Regulations that are published on a daily basis, more regulations are coming out every single day. We turned our Western democracies into technocracies, where we were delegating. When you look at the legislation before the Second World War and after the Second World War, before the legislation became before it would be very detailed about what needed to be done to solve a particular problem.
Right.
After the Second World War, the legislation simply says, okay, we have an issue, which is ozone depletion. So we are giving the authority to the EPA to figure out what to do about ozone. We, the Congress, aren't saying what should be done. We're letting EPA figure it out. So we have delegated our authority to you to figure it out. And then EPA goes off and drafts regulations that then impact all of the voters. Well, long story short, that model of political model has failed. Because
it didn't really work to begin with. It got like the short term. It got the short term done, but the long term, no one could calculate.
Well, that. I mean, since the Second World War, what has happened? And this is thanks to Bretton Woods and the United States Navy, which made the world safe for global trade. Is since the Second World War, all of the manufacturing went to China. If you want to, take out the decimal points and just sort of, okay. And the problem with that is I'm back here, I'm the voter. I said, wait a minute, I need that job. I don't have the job anymore. And, I want my family to be safe, and things aren't really, going, and my kids aren't getting a future. And you're spending an awful lot of time legislating stuff, telling me what to do.
Right.
So that compact between the voter and the political class, I think, has fallen apart. And the anger among voters, those at that bottom of the hierarchies that are not part of the intelligentsia, manifested itself in Trump's election. And you can look at different. It's like when Bloomberg was running was a candidate for the Democratic nomination, and he gave a speech talking about the change that was happening. And we went from being farmers to industrial manufacturers. Well, we need to retrain these people, because farming is so simplistic. It's you put a hole in the ground, you put a seed in it, and it grows. It doesn't require a lot of brains to be a farmer. Well, obviously, Mr. Bloomberg has never been on a farm.
Right, apparently.
And there's a great YouTube channel called Millennial Farmer. And it's a gentleman in Wisconsin. And every couple of days, he spends 10 to 20 minutes sort of capturing on a YouTube video what he is doing that day to farm wheat and soybean. And when you watch a couple of these videos and you get a sense of the complexity of the process, he's got 3 or 4 flat panels within the cab of a tractor at the same time, and he's connected to a satellite. The sophistication of farming, Mr. Bloomberg had no clue. So you could see this disconnect between, if you will, the ruling class and the electorate. And the electorate is pissed. And that's what's manifesting itself in all of the different things that's happening. Well, get the daily stuff out of the way. Think about those larger tectonic plates moving in terms of how to reconcile the electorate's dissatisfaction with how governance is currently operating. And I think we'll see within the next 5 to 10 years a material change. And I'm not necessarily saying this is revolution or anything like that, but a material change in how the political system addresses these issues, because it's broken and it's not working.
Right.
But the day-to-day stuff, I blow it. I don't even pay any attention to it, because I am much more interested in those longer-term trend lines, because that's what will last.
Oh no, that's literally, that's why I kind of look perplexed, like while you're explaining this, because that's what I've been thinking is, so the first thing that came to my mind when you mentioned World War II was my martial arts instructor is a very hardcore Trump fan, and it's one of those. He's like, "Oh, the election was rigged this year." I'm like, "Well, yes and no. I mean, this has been going on for a while since we were allowed to essentially move the lines every 4 years, the county lines." I said this was happening probably back in the 80s when it was instated. Or just the average Joe didn't know this, because you had that one smart guy that had all the right data, and they would just hire him and tell him he would remove everything. So I'm like, this has kind of been going on for years. It's only just recently predominant that it's a problem.
It's been going on. And again, part of the problem is we don't teach history anymore.
No, we don't.
If you go back and you look at the political history of this country and the number of contested elections,
It's a lot, actually.
Quite a few. And some of them were incredibly smarmy. There's well, I mean, the most recent example was Kennedy Nixon. It was decided by the electoral votes coming out of Illinois. And as they were counting the ballots, downstate, which tended to be Republican, was leading. and Illinois was going to go for Nixon. But the votes from Mayor Daley's Chicago never showed up until late. And curiously enough, there were enough votes out of the Democratic areas or in Chicago to tip Illinois for Kennedy. So there are a lot of people that feel that that election was gained. There are a lot of people that feel that Bush and what's his name? The climate change.
Al Gore.
Al Gore, thank you. That election, the hanging Chads ballots in Florida, that election was gained. Many of the elections in the 19th century were very smarmy in the way they were ultimately resolved. So this is nothing new. I think if there is anything new, it's the fact that we now have the internet and the capacity of media so that everyone has a voice. You've got a voice. You wouldn't have had a voice, 20 years ago.
God, no.
Everybody's got a voice, and you tend to listen to people that agree with you. So it becomes an echo chamber.
Mm-hmm. That's really funny because that's literally what in private conversations with people. I say that I'm like, social media is great. There are some movements that truly need to be done. Like, as shitty as he is, the Harvey Weinstein thing, but it's like that also then fed into a terrible trend of innocent men were being accused of things because women wanted their 15 minutes of fame. Nothing against the women, but it was just like some of these guys were innocent and they got completely destroyed, and they can't get a job, they can't fend for their families now. But it's one of those my personal conversations is social media is one of those. Are you familiar with Nikola Tesla's comment about life in the future?
No.
So he said, in the future, the world will be beautiful. All will be known. All known knowledge will be accessible, and all humans will interact with each other. Does that sound as you? So, but then we take the 1984, George Orwell's, the dystopia of using that same thing against us. So it's one of those, it's one of those, what side do you want to take then? Because if you do one of Nikola Tesla's, we are truly now in the best age of our human existence because all knowledge and all people can be contacted. In a normal circumstance, I never contact you, kind of thing.
No, but in terms of the communication of ideas,
is much more fluid.
Much more fluid, and again, that's part of the uncertainty. This doesn't look like anything we've ever had before. The capacity to communicate, to influence, the shifts in political sentiment are perhaps more dramatic, more extreme, maybe. But the flow of information, the metaverse, whatever the hell
that's just stupid personally for him.
And when you look at cryptocurrency and blockchain and again, the amount of disruptive technology that is changing our daily lives. My life today, my daughter-in-law was having a conversation with some of my grandchildren this past year, and they were watching the Christmas movie Home Alone.
Okay.
And in the movie, Macaulay Culkin at one point is watching a VHS tape video of a 1930s gangster movie that he records.
Okay.
So he's setting up the video, he puts the cassette in and he's watching the movie. And my grandchildren ask my daughter-in-law, what's that machine? And she says, well, that's a VHS player. And says, well, what does that do? And then she says, well, it's kind of like a DVD. What's the difference between a DVD and a CD? And it says, Well, and of course now they've got Netflix and it's all. And she said, well, you'd go to a store and they'd have all of these cassettes, and then you'd pick the movie you want and you'd rent that box and you'd take it home and then you'd put it in this machine and then you could watch it. And then when you were done watching it, you take it out. We had another machine that you could put it in to rewind it before you took it back. And my one grandson goes, how did you live like that? Because all he knows is Netflix, which is instantaneous communication of any sort of entertainment that you could possibly imagine at his fingertips. There's a great YouTube video of two 17-year-olds being given a rotary telephone and 5 minutes to dial a phone number. And you're watching these two young guys trying to figure out how to make a rotary telephone work because they had never seen one before.
Right.
The change. And then how do you say, well, what we used to do, how does that apply to what this is going to look like?
Right.
So I again, the politics of the moment are simply the manifestation, I think, of this chaotic situation where people are afraid of the future because they can't look forward and say, well, looking at my parents and looking at my grandparents and how they lived, what their world looked like is going to be what my world looks like. It ain't.
Right.
And people are afraid. And so when they get afraid, they overreact. So you're getting, the politics are going this way, that way.
Yeah. That's one of those. Yeah. There's not really right. It's like politics, money, and religion. There's no real right answer to it. But yeah, the uncertainty and then the social media, I'm trying to think of words and I can't right now. It's such a deep topic. I'm sorry.
It's chaos.
It is.
It is chaos because there's no way to control it. And, people complain. We talked earlier about the fourth estate, the media, and how they may be part of the problem because but they've always been part of the problem. I mean, when you look back at newspapers in the 19th century, the role of newspapers in the 19th century was exclusively almost to be the mouthpieces for different political parties.
It didn't really change. I listened to Tom Sawyer's autobiography, Roughing It, and everything that was almost like 200 years ago when he was around, 200-ish. Either way, everything that's going on right now, it's the same thing they did back then. And it's like, we literally haven't changed. The only thing that's different now is we have a cell phone. That's it. We're literally the same people.
Well, and the speed at which things change is faster. And again, I'm repeating myself.
Right.
How you did things 5 years ago, you certainly don't do that now. Just the mode of operation. Publishing this book, when I spent all last year writing it, and then at the beginning of this year, I figured, well, I'm getting close to being done. I'll go find an agent. And I spent a month or two trying to find an agent and discovered, maybe I'm a little cynical here, but I discovered that agents are mostly interested in people who have a very significant social media presence.
Oh, no, you're not. Yeah, you're not seeing anything. That was me. I was going to get an agent so I can get into like Penguin. And the guy's like, oh yeah, you don't exist, so we're not going to touch you, or we'll touch you, but it's going to cost you $5,000 a month when it would have been like a $1,000 a month. And I'm like, what?
Yeah. So a friend of mine I've known for years, a marketing guy, was in the process of writing his first book, and I spent an hour on the phone in a Zoom call actually with him.
Okay.
And really got introduced to where the publishing industry is going.
Oh, it's extremely
And
interesting.
well, it is. I mean, because most books are self-published now. I mean, that was printed by Amazon. 70% of the books sold are through Amazon. And the mix between paperbacks, ebooks, audiobooks, and hardcover is rapidly evolving.
I think it's still paper, like an actual hard book is still one of the best sellers. But then it's like, I would assume personally, but I realize the same thing. It's either paperback or audio, then ebook.
Well, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I do know that they're dramatically different than what they were before.
I would say even
they're constantly changing.
Something like 8 years ago, it was nothing like this. It was just pretty much paper, and that was it.
And then, of course, the other attribute to this is everybody's got a website, and
yes,
everybody wants to be on YouTube and be a YouTuber. And
now it's TikToking.
Yeah, and TikToking. And so, and again, the means of communication, the technologies, the evolution of it to be at the cutting edge of it, just crypto kitties, really? I mean, NFTs, it's, and people are spending money.
Real money. A lot of my coworkers.
Real money to get cryptocurrency to go buy a crypto kitty, right? It's like, okay, all right. I guess somewhere in the world this makes sense, but
well, for me, this is because like a lot of my coworkers are buying shit coins. Essentially, they're 1/1 millionth of a percentile of a penny, and they're buying millions of these coins. And one of them, he told me, because he knows I'm very good at reading charts and for trading. And so he's like, what do you see? I'm like, this thing's going to fall off the face of a cliff. It's too high. Where did you buy in? And he pointed to me. I'm like, I'd sell now, even though it says you lost somehow it says you lost $5, but if you keep this up, 1/1 millionth of a percentile of a penny times 5 million, that's going to be very painful as it just keeps going down. And so he did. And it was just one of those, he came back, okay, I bought in, it hit the bottom. He shows me the chart and I'm like, you really need to understand the fundamentals of just charts.
That doesn't say what you think it says.
It does not say that.
But again, it's change, and that's why I do scenario planning, because it's so difficult to forecast. And the beauty of good scenario planning is you're looking at potential outcomes rather than probable outcomes. And if you've done your scenario planning right, within the four corners of your scenarios, somewhere in there lurks something that looks like the future. But it forces you to think about potential outcomes that may be improbable, but anymore, given the rate and the degree of change and how quickly they are accelerating, probability is problematic.
Really, it is.
You really don't know what's going to happen, so you better be prepared for all of it, or at least think about all of it. And so, I just coming back to your fundamental question about the politics. For me, it's noise. It really is noise. We're looking at, and I'm not the only one saying that. There's a couple authors that I actually mentioned in the book. One is George Friedman, who has written a book called "The Storm Before the Calm," and is speaking to the fact that we are going through one of these disruptive periods where the American socio-political system is going to reinvent itself.
Right.
So, I mean, I'm not the only one that's saying that we're at one of these inflection points where they're going to have to rewrite the rule book a bit, because, and it's happened several times in our past. I mean, when you look at our government today, it's nothing like it was before the Civil War. Certainly nothing like it was during the Gilded Age. and was redefined dramatically by the Depression.
Yeah.
And we're going through another redefinition. And the question is, well, what's it going to be and what's it going to look like? One of the points I think Friedman makes it. The irony is when you think back to 19th century politics and Tammany Hall, okay, where you had political machines in urban areas.
Mm-hmm.
The genius of that political machine, whoever was in charge, Boss Tweed, whoever, they kept everybody in line and made sure everybody voted the way they were supposed to.
Right.
But the system was extremely responsive to the individuals within that group. So if somebody in Boss Tweed's world came and said, I've got a problem with X, can you help me with it? Now, how Boss Tweed might have solved the problem for that person might not necessarily have been kosher, but he was responsive to that person and took care of his problem. So as a strictly political system in terms of fulfilling needs, at the local level, it worked.
It did.
And then you really go to post-World War II, where you've got technocrats writing regulations that, an individual, I got a farmer, and he's got an issue with water rights, but there isn't anybody in that regulatory bureaucracy that gives a damn about that farmer and his particular problems. And he just gets chewed up in the wheels. I'll give you a great example of the brilliance of our technocracy. Long years ago, I was doing regulatory work for one of the businesses I was working for, General Electric. And at the time, the Department of Energy was writing rules to control the energy performance of appliances.
Okay.
Congress had passed a law that said, we need to conserve energy in our appliances. We're delegating the authority to DOE to figure it out because we're not smart enough. Okay, so classic case of delegating authority to the regulatory agency. So DOE is now going to write a rule on energy performance of ovens. The first proposal that came out in the Federal Register from DOE on minimizing the energy consumption of ovens was a design standard. It wasn't a performance standard. And what they were proposing was we are going to require that oven makers take the window out of the oven doors because there is so much heat leakage through that window that by making the door solid, the oven will be so much more efficient. And as I read that the first time I saw it, my immediate reaction is the person that wrote this rule for oven use has never used an oven. Because you need the window to see what's going on inside the oven when you're baking a pie or a roast or whatever. And if you don't have the window, what you're going to do is you're going to open up the door to see, and that's going to take all that hot air and dump it. And you're going to start over again when you close the door. So it's going to be 10 times worse from an energy standpoint than if you had left the window in.
Right.
One of the hardest things I had to do was write comments for a hearing on this rule. How do you politely tell somebody that they are a complete idiot? Because the rule, as it was originally proposed, made absolutely no sense.
No, it doesn't. I was just thinking, I'm like, wait, yeah, that person's never used an oven before because you do. Sometimes it will finish early and you can see through the window. They're like,
yeah,
it's done. I didn't need the 20 minutes kind of thing.
Yeah. So, the regulatory world that we have created is not as responsive in some respects as Tammany Hall was. And so the individual who is being subjected to these regulations that in the individual's perspective make no sense is getting sick and tired of it. And that was what Brexit was about.
Yeah. I want to say, tying into Brexit, it's kind of like we're experiencing the tail end of all the damage. But this has been going like I told my instructor, this has been going on for years. I just was quiet kind of thing. How I explained it in my manner is essentially we used to be a community of a village, let's say tops 3,000 people. This is the same village as the one where you got your wife, you raised your kids, you had your job, everything. Like you never left it. If you left, you were weird and you were shunned and they didn't even take you back kind of thing. And I said, now we can talk to anyone in any different village. It doesn't matter where you live. Which, as our human, how our brains work, that's unheard of. Like the how fast are we going? And I'm like, this is almost like the too much information, and like Facebook, they're intentionally playing into human psychology, where the curiosity before, where you're curious for the infinite scrolling, but it'll never stop. So it's I told them, like, we're in the age where it's sad to say algorithms and AI know us better than we know ourselves. And they are, I said, right now it's for capitalism, which is for good or for bad. But when they start making choices like smart grids, like they're going to do that in China. Oh, so-and-so, because China has apparently like a whole ranking system. And it's like, oh, so-and-so is rank 1 out of 10. Like, I don't know the actual system, but it's like, oh, we don't need to send them energy. I said, in America, if we get to that point, which looks like we're trying to copy China anyways, it's like, then where's the limit? It's like, oh, you're a business owner. Okay, we'll just increase your price for energy, even though you need it for your job, because we just want to. Said, so I told them, we're in an age where, kind of like you, we don't know what's going to happen. And it's one of those, it could be the best thing or it could be the worst thing for a certain set of people.
Yeah, well, it's the challenge is getting your arms around it and you have to start with the right data. You have to start, and glean from that raw data the right information, and then make sense of the interrelationships of those little bits of information. And the challenge we face is that the data flow is because we're all interconnected and there's a sensor on everything.
There is.
The amount of data being generated is an absolute, it's trying to drink from a fire hose.
Yeah.
And pulling out the useful information in order to generate knowledge is becoming so difficult. And so to your point, people just sort of throw up their hands and make a guess.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to get through that process. So.
It really is. And yeah. I would say that kind of like the whole moral of this conversation is, so what is the right answer? What is the right path?
Well, I think at the moment it's for me, it's not so much what's the right answer as what's the right conversation.
Okay.
Because I think most of the conversations that are taking place are missing out on what are the right questions to be asking. Most of the conversations are based upon false assumptions as to what the data is, what the information is. So if you're starting your conversation on the wrong information and on bad data, it doesn't really matter where that conversation goes because it won't be helpful. So taking the time to really think, reflect, digest on what the actual state of affairs is. Again, time after time after time, I see references to, we're despoiling the planet because this ever increasing population, we're going to gobble everything up. That's not what's going to happen. Something very different is going to happen. And it's not a case of a funnel that goes to a point. It's a choke point, and then the funnel expands back up again. And if you don't understand that, and if you're not approaching the problems, understanding the facts as they are, it's hopeless. And so I think that's the point, is getting people to what's actually going on. What really are the facts, and where can that lead us, as opposed to assuming you know what's going on and then just bullshitting.
Yeah, that's again what I was coming back to, is like, well, how do you communicate this to the people that are ignorant and don't want to listen, kind of thing.
Well, I wrote a book.
There we go. That's how we get to them. We just throw the book at them and be like, read it. We just throw it like bricks, like, read this.
Yes.
Read this.
Good luck with that. Yeah.
I'll start a YouTube channel and I'll film myself throwing your book at people.
Well, I hope this was helpful.
Oh, it was. And it was a great chat. Honestly, it's silly to say. I try not to get political and stuff, but I mean, this whole conversation was just intrinsically that. But some of my guests, it's been interesting. They like won't even talk on it. And I'm like, well, human existence, if it's you and me, that's just a debate. But the third person listening, that becomes political. So I'm like, it really doesn't matter what we do. Just not saying hello. We could get in trouble for that now with our society.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
it gets back to who decides what you're allowed to say.
Right.
And that's sad. That's very sad.
It is. Yeah. The whole reason it's silly to say, like, the whole reason I started my show was like my long story of big pharma regime, bad drugs. They thought I was schizophrenic and I wasn't, but I was deathly scared to say my opinion because of that unknown mob on Twitter that, and now I realize doing this, I'm like, they can say whatever the hell they want. That's free advertising for me, kind of thing. Because others are going to be like, who's this person? I got to listen to make sure he's an asshole too. And then they're like, wait, he's not an asshole. What are you talking about, crazy person? And, yeah. But again, I was conditioned to think, I now joke, the Twitter overlords that tweet their wokeness at us. Like, they're not in charge of anything. Yes, they're loud. Ultimately, though, what are they going to do? Cry?
Well, again, I think that's all groupthink. When you're in a group, allegiance to the ideology of that group, whatever group it is, every group is the same. I'm not suggesting it's only some groups. All groups that are made out of human beings operate the same way. Every single one.
Right.
When you're in that group, and it's just a question of intensity, when you're in that group, your allegiance to the ideology is your ticket to promotion and advancement in the group.
Right.
And the louder you chant that ideology, the higher up the pyramid you get to go.
Right.
And depending upon what the group's ideology is, my personal opinion is that the ones that chant the loudest are the ones that are most uncertain about their ideology. And so their only recourse is to yell it louder.
That's funny, because actually this whole time you were just explaining the group ideology and all that. This podcaster, he's strictly audio, but he's teaching people how to get healthy. Essentially, it's keto, but it's a little different. But the funny thing is the way he says it, he's like, essentially, you're a carnivorous vegan. You eat a lot of meat, but you also eat a lot of veggies. And he has, because his special proposition is send me 170 characters less on Twitter, essentially text me in public, and I will reply to you. So he has all the vegan community, the PETA and all that on his case. And all of them are saying you're canceled. And he's like, well, I still get my 100,000 downloads. How are you saying I'm canceled? Kind of thing. And that he makes it a point now to like hit the beehive. It's like, vegans, you might want to get your kombucha. This is going to be a good episode kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then they blow it up and everything. It's one of those, I'm like, yeah, they can't actually stop them. They can yell all they want, but they can't stop them.
Well, and the more uncertain you are if you're not comfortable exposing your opinions to debate, if you're not comfortable exposing your opinions to countering views that disagree with your view, and you can't defend it, the only way you can defend it is by silencing the other side. That tells me that you're afraid that you're wrong. Position isn't that good because you can't stand the heat of a counter view.
I want to say, it sounds like you predominantly have worked for others, or did you start on your own?
I'm sorry?
Did you mainly work for corporations, or did you start out on your own?
No, I actually the first 11 years or thereabouts, I worked for the government in national security. I was a minor Cold Warrior, and that I think really educated me to how uncertain the world is. We're talking about, trying to forecast what's going to go on. Well, in 1987, when I was at the National War College, if I had stood up and say, okay, I'm going to forecast that in 1989, the Berlin Wall is going to come down.
Okay.
They would have looked at me like I had, who's this guy?
You had a third eye, and they're like, what the fuck?
And in 1990, the Soviet Union will implode. They would have tossed me out the front door.
Right.
And that was a lesson learned about, conventional, the groupthink, conventional wisdom of the time surrounding the Cold War and the Soviet Union was just flat out wrong. And then after we won the Cold War, it's funny. I started in 1979, and as I was doing work with the intelligence community, I really enjoyed that. I was very, very happy working in national security. I never failed the sick feeling in the pit of your stomach test. It was very satisfying work. And my thinking at the time was, well, there's always going to be a Cold War, so I've got a career. Then 1990 comes around, Soviet Union collapses, and we won. And all the appropriations for military and the intel community just cratered because nobody assumed, this was, I'm trying to think of the name of the guy that wrote the article at the end of history. Fukuyama, Francis Fukuyama, The End of History. Western civilization had won. And then, of course, we soon thereafter had the Iraq War. Nobody anticipated that one. But I then went and worked in the private sector, primarily for large global conglomerates, GE, and then a Swedish conglomerate, AB Electrolux. And then the last 20 years I spent with a specialty chemical company, doing strategy work, regulatory work, government relations, sustainability, a lot of sustainability work.
Yeah, I would say that's the key word now, is sustainability too. So the reason I brought up working for someone, that's the biggest one. As I've talked to different people, it's a bit of a running joke, but it's kind of starting to realize it's true, is like the contradiction. One of the people said, the moment you know you're a successful business person or entrepreneur or whatever you're doing is when you have actually people yelling at you, even if you're right. Like essentially the modern haters kind of thing. And then that's one thing, as I've realized, like going about this is like your analogy, like there's going to be millions making pennies. Is like, okay, let's say I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to strike out on my own in my own path. And I realize now it's like literally it's high volume at this point. I'll be making pennies and I'll be lucky if I can scrap together an extra $500 in a month. But most of that's going to be taken in taxes because I would be apparently the rich for selling things. So it's, yeah. And that's where I was thinking for you. It's like, okay, so you worked a stable job, you have a good retirement, this and that. So the entrepreneurial mindset wouldn't have to, I won't say, but some of your jobs, so it sounded like you did have to be a little more entrepreneurial than most positions.
Oh, well, yes, because just because you're in a corporation doesn't, I mean, part of the challenge with large corporations, and it's the curse, when you are successful, you assume your business model is ironclad and you're unwilling to challenge it, to change it, to continue to survive. When you look at the data, the average lifespan of an American corporation is dropping rapidly.
Extremely fast.
Very fast. So there's got to be a reason for that. And we're talking big companies too. You know, look at what happened to GE. My dad worked for a company in Cleveland called Addressograph Multigraph in the 50s and 60s. Now, what Addressograph Multigraph did, they were a Fortune 500 blue chip company, global company. They made all of the mechanical equipment that you would find in an office before computers.
Okay.
So processing all paperwork of any kind, you know, mass producing letters or booklets or they made credit card readers. They made dog tags. So they had a lot of mechanical equipment that did printing and collating and all that sort of stuff. Their best year was 1968, and then computers came along and boom, they're gone. They are, you know, who's ever heard of Addressograph Multigraph? You know, they just vanished because they couldn't see the future and couldn't adjust it, which is what an entrepreneur needs to do, is be adaptable. Now, it just so happened that, for example, when I worked in the specialty chemical company, Lubrizol, they had new business development groups, and I spent a lot of time working with them.
Right.
And the challenge was coming up with new businesses in an existing business. Because, again, the existing business guy knows how to do what he's doing, and you give him something new to do, and he doesn't want to do it. You know, I get paid for doing this and I'm successful at that, and you want me to do something new and unknown that may not pay off. Tell me again why I'm supposed to do that. I'm not going to do that. So pushing entrepreneurship in a corporation is, you know, the entrepreneurs that working out of the Starbucks, they've got it easy compared to an entrepreneur in a corporation.
Yeah.
Because you don't have that headwind.
Yeah. That's the biggest one I've noticed as I've talked to different people is like, yes, everyone's like, oh, I want to be a CEO and make all that money. But they don't, because they have a worker's mindset. They don't realize that one kid that slipped and fell and cracked his head open could literally destroy your business. And that's your head, not the employees. The employees, you just cut them their 2 weeks. It's like, okay, business is closed. Sorry, here's 2 weeks. Go find a new job. But you as the CEO are stuck with that tab. Even if now that's where like structures come in, you wouldn't necessarily be stuck with it, but you still have to deal with it, kind of thing. And a lot of people are like, I want to be a CEO. I'm like, you sure about that? You really sure about that?
Yeah.
Are you sure you can sleep at night with all the stuff that could go wrong? And that's when they're like, oh, hey, it's not that bad. You're right. I show up, I bark a couple mean orders, I get my stock options, and I go home. I'm like, no.
No, that's not how it works.
That's not how it works.
No.
It's never worked that way. If it did, damn, everyone would be wanting that job then. So I love it. I'm kind of running.
I hope this, meets your need.
Oh, 100%. I love it. It was quite insightful and fun. So I got 3 going out questions for you.
Okay.
So other than work and writing your book, what have you been doing to keep busy during these lockdown times?
Well, actually,
Okay.
I teach and I do some consulting. Now, that hasn't really occupied a whole lot of my time with COVID for obvious reasons.
Right.
So those don't answer your question. I guess what I do above and beyond that is I do a heck of a lot of. I work with my hands. I make things. We've moved into a relatively new home, and there are things that the boss doesn't like, and so I'm changing stuff and fixing stuff and sawing and nailing and running wires and digging holes and moving trees. And
Man, this sounds like a brutal boss.
it's a harsh taskmaster, but I love the physical activity. So that's
There we go.
that's what I do.
Just been fixing things around the house. That's
not
awesome.
writing my book.
The second one is for someone aspiring to be like you, an author, successfully gone through the corporate life. Sounds like successfully married too.
Yes.
What are some tips, tricks, or advice you give them?
When you look at a job, what I've always told my students is any job that you're thinking of taking, and here I'm not talking about necessarily, well, I guess it would apply to an entrepreneur. You could use the same analytical tool. I use a 9 blocker.
Okay.
And on the one axis are the ones, the tens, and the hundreds. The ones, that's the person you're going to work for. The tens are the people you see every day, your immediate team.
Okay.
And the hundreds is the larger corporate entity, whatever it may be as a whole. Okay. And you evaluate those 3 tiers on 3 layers. The intellectual satisfaction you get, the emotional satisfaction you get, and the money. And in effect, the financial, the security of it, be it health benefits or whatever, that remuneration piece. So I've had jobs where the hundreds was great. The corporation was great. It was intellectually challenging, but it wasn't emotionally satisfying because it was all about the money. That's all they cared about, was all about the money. The tens for that group, most of the people I didn't really get along with on an emotional level. Again, the intellectual issues were challenging. So I'm doing pluses and minuses here. And the ones, my boss, he and I did not get along for a lot of different reasons. So you're filling in that 9 blocker with pluses, ones, twos, threes, pluses and minuses, however you want. But it forces you to think about a job across a spectrum of attributes.
Right.
You just don't focus on one, because any one of them could sink your ship, if you will, depending upon how bad it got or how good it was. So that would be, my suggestion is when you're looking at what you want to do or where you're going to go, think of it in sort of those terms. And the intellectual and the emotional are qualitatively different.
Yes.
When I first got to Lubrizol, I was hired in by a new CEO who was just embarking on a new corporate vision, fluid technologies for a better world.
Okay.
That tagline, it was amazing what that tagline meant for rank and file employees, because this is the Simon Sinek why. not what am I doing, but why am I doing it? So the emotional piece of, and what I'm doing satisfying, that's different than the intellectual piece, which is this just mindless, or am I being challenged? Is this problem solving? Is this keeping me challenged? Thinking. So it's two different things.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's definitely a big one. And by the way, the entrepreneur thing is just one of those I'm starting to realize I am one, but it's the I'm not in a position to take it. But that not 3x3, that's genius. Yeah, because whatever you're doing, if one side's more red than the other, you're like, maybe it's a problem. That's actually a really good strategy. I'm gonna probably take that. Just an FYI.
Sure.
So the last one is, do you have a website, social media, or email everyone can contact you and be like, hey, I heard you on the show?
Yeah, well, actually, the last line of the book contains my email address.
Okay.
It's tvthiele at fourthage.com.
Okay.
And I do have a website, which is fourthage.com. And I'm on LinkedIn.
Okay.
And I'm a boomer, so I'm having a hard time with the website. Just trying to keep it populated. I'm trying to run it like a blog, but being a boomer, this is new to me. So I'm trying to figure out how to make it go. But obviously, if anybody is at all interested in talking to me, because the purpose of the book, it's not like I've got all the answers by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not trying to put myself out as being some Einstein here. I'm just trying to prompt a good argument, because if people start talking about this, I'll consider this a success.
100%. No, 100%. Because these are topics that we need to talk about, but no one wants to talk about it.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I love this. I love it. You've been awesome. Good fun. It's been an absolute honor and a pleasure to chat with you.
I enjoyed it as well. It was a time well spent.
Well spent, indeed. Well, congratulations. You made it to the end. You are an awesome person. Not many make it here. So, being the awesome person that you are, can you do me one more awesome favor? Can you rate and review this on whatever podcast services you're using? If you do it on Apple and you leave an actual written review, I have a thing on my website. I will take your written review and post it for all to see. Congratulations, you're permanently sealed on my site. Otherwise, I am trying to do YouTube more and live streaming. I will try to put as many of the YouTube links in the description of the show as I can. So give your boy some extra help over on YouTube. Watch my videos. I just mute it and change the channel, change the window or something. But yeah, that's it. Thank you for being awesome, and see you next time.